The woman standing in the doorway of the general store had eyes like flint and a spine straighter than the barrel of a Winchester rifle. And when the dusty cowboy tipped his hat to her that scorching July afternoon in 1878, she looked right through him as if he were made of nothing but prairie wind and wishful thinking. Faye Newsome had arrived in Wyatt, Colorado just 3 months prior, and in that time she had made it abundantly clear to every man who dared approach her that she had no interest in courtship, marriage, or any of the romantic nonsense that seemed to consume the other women in town. At 24 years old, she had seen enough of what people called love to know it was nothing more than a pretty lie wrapped around desperation and convenience. Her mother had loved her father, and he had drunk himself to death anyway, leaving them with nothing but debts and broken promises. Her sister had loved a man who swore he would give her the world, and then he left her alone with 2 babies and a third on the way while he chased gold in California, never to return. No, Faye had learned her lessons well, and she would not be making the same mistakes. She ran the boarding house on the east end of town, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked in the wind. The work was hard and the hours long, but it was hers, bought with money she had saved working as a seamstress in Denver for 6 years. Every penny carefully hoarded while other girls spent their wages on ribbons and sweets. The boarding house gave her independence, and independence was worth more than any man's empty promises. The cowboy who had tipped his hat to her was named Wade Armstrong, though Faye did not know this yet, nor did she care to learn it. He was 27 years old, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and hands that bore the calluses of a man who worked cattle for a living. He had kind eyes the color of summer sky and a quiet way about him that made people comfortable, though Faye was determined not to be among them. Wade had been working at the Triple Bar Ranch 15 miles north of Wyatt for the past 2 years, ever since he had drifted down from Wyoming looking for steady work and a place to settle. He had noticed Faye the first time he came into town after her arrival, had seen the way she carried herself with such fierce independence, and something about her had caught in his chest like a burr on a saddle blanket. But Wade Armstrong was a patient man, the kind who understood that some things could not be rushed, that a spooked horse needed time and gentle handling before it would trust again. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed with increasing frequency, though whether by accident or Wade's careful design, Faye could not quite determine. He would be at the general store when she stopped to buy flour and sugar, or riding past the boarding house just as she stepped out to sweep the porch. He always offered a polite greeting, never pushing for conversation, never lingering longer than was proper. His manner was respectful, his distance carefully maintained, and this puzzled Faye more than bold advances would have. She was accustomed to men who wanted something from her, who saw her as a prize to be won or a convenience to be acquired. Wade's patient courtesy unsettled her precisely, because it seemed to expect nothing in return. One afternoon in late August, Faye was returning from the bank with the month's receipts when her wagon wheel struck a rut in the road, and the axle cracked with a sound like breaking bone. The wagon lurched sideways, and Faye had to grip the seat to keep from being thrown. She climbed down to assess the damage, her mood darkening as she realized there was no way to drive the wagon home in this condition. She was considering her options, none of them pleasant, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Wade reined in his horse and dismounted in one smooth motion, his eyes taking in the situation immediately. "Looks like you have got yourself some trouble there, Miss Newsome," he said, his voice low and even. "I can manage," Faye replied automatically. Though they both knew this was not true, Wade nodded as if she had said something perfectly reasonable. I am sure you can. But seeing as I am here anyway, and I've got rope and some experience with broken axles, maybe you would let me give you a hand. Save you some time." Faye wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her walls of independence, but the sun was getting lower and she still had guests to feed back at the boarding house. Practicality won over pride. "Fine, but I am not a charity case." "Never thought you were," Wade said simply. He set to work without further comment, his movements efficient and sure. He rigged a temporary brace for the axle using rope and a spare piece of wood from his saddlebag, working with the kind of competence that spoke of years spent solving problems on the trail. While he worked, he kept up a gentle stream of conversation, not requiring responses but filling the silence with observations about the weather, the state of the cattle market, a hawk circling overhead. Despite herself, Faye found the sound of his voice oddly soothing. There was no boasting in it, no attempts to impress her with tales of his prowess or importance. He talked like a man comfortable with silence, but willing to offer comfort through words, the way one might talk to a nervous animal. When he finished, the axle was secure enough to make it back to town at a careful pace. Wade brushed the dust from his hands and looked at her with those clear blue eyes. "That should hold until you can get it to the wheelwright. Just take it slow." "Thank you," Faye said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "What do I owe you?" Wade shook his head. "Nothing. Neighbors help neighbors. That is how things work out here." "We are not neighbors," Faye pointed out. "You live 15 miles away." "Well, then, I guess we are friendly acquaintances," Wade said, and there was the hint of warmth in his voice that might have been humor. "That is close enough for helping with a broken axle." He tipped his hat to her then, mounted his horse and rode off before Faye could formulate a response. She drove the wagon home slowly, as instructed, and tried not to think about the way he had helped her without making her feel weak or indebted. She tried not to think about him at all, in fact, but found this more difficult than it should have been. The summer heat began to break as September arrived, bringing cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color to the aspen groves in the mountains. Faye's boarding house had steady business, as Wyatt was growing with the mining operations in the nearby hills and the railroad talk that seemed to dominate every conversation in the saloon. She kept her head down and her heart locked away, and told herself she was content. But Wade Armstrong had a way of appearing when she least expected it, and his presence was becoming harder to ignore. When she struggled to carry a heavy trunk up the stairs for a new boarder, Wade happened to be passing by and quietly took the weight of it, carrying it up as if it weighed nothing. When her roof began to leak during a rainstorm, Wade showed up the next morning with tar and shingles, saying only that he had heard about the problem and had some free time. When she protested that she could hire someone, he simply said that the work was already done, so there was no point arguing about it now. Each act of service was offered without fanfare, without expectation of reward or even gratitude. Wade never lingered afterward trying to turn his help into an opportunity for courtship. He simply did what needed doing and then went on his way, as if helping her was the most natural thing in the world. It infuriated Faye, though she could not quite articulate why. She was not accustomed to kindness that asked nothing in return. Every good deed in her experience had come with strings attached, with expectations and obligations that eventually strangled whatever gratitude she might have felt. But Wade's help seemed genuinely freely given, and this made her suspicious precisely because it seemed too good to be true. One evening in October, as Faye was closing up the kitchen after serving dinner to her boarders, she heard a knock at the back door. She opened it to find Wade standing there with a bushel basket full of apples. "Evening, Miss Newsome," he said. The trees at the ranch came in heavy this year. Cook said she had more than she could use, so I thought you might be able to make something of them. For your boarders." Faye looked at the apples, their skins glossy red and green in the lamplight, and felt something twist in her chest. "Why do you do this?" she asked, and her voice came out harder than she intended. Wade tilted his head slightly, studying her face. "Do what? This? All of this?" "The help, the kindness. What is it you want from me?" He was quiet for a moment, and in the silence Faye could hear the wind rustling through the cottonwood tree beside the house. When Wade spoke, his voice was gentle. "I do not want anything from you, Miss Newsome. I just thought you could use some apples." "Nobody does something for nothing," Faye said flatly. "There is always a price." Wade set the basket down on the porch step carefully. "Maybe in your experience that has been true, but I am not everybody else. I help you because I choose to, because I see a woman working hard to build something for herself, and I respect that. There is no debt. There is no obligation. If you want to take the apples and make pies with them, that is fine. If you would rather I take them away, I will do that too. Either way, I will still tip my hat to you when I see you in town, and I will still help if you need it, because that is the kind of man my father raised me to be." He touched the brim of his hat then, a gesture Faye had seen him perform dozens of times, but tonight it seemed weighted with meaning. He turned to go, but Faye heard herself call out before he could leave. "Wait." Wade paused, looking back at her expectantly. Faye took a breath, wrestling with pride and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you, for the apples, and for the other things. I am not used to kindness without strings attached." "Maybe it is time you got used to it," Wade said quietly. "Not everyone is looking to take from you, Miss Newsome. Some people just want to give." After he left, Faye brought the basket of apples inside and stood in her kitchen for a long time, thinking about his words. That night, she made 3 apple pies, and in the morning she sent one to the ranch with a young boy who ran errands for tips, along with a note that said simply, "Thank you." When the boy returned, he brought a note back written in careful, even handwriting. "Best pie I ever tasted. Thank you for thinking of me." Faye tucked the note into her apron pocket and tried to ignore the way her heart had stuttered when she read it. The weeks that followed brought the first real cold, and with it a shift in the careful balance between Faye and Wade. She found herself watching for him when she went into town, found herself disappointed when a Saturday passed without his familiar figure appearing somewhere in her periphery. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was not the kind of woman who waited for a man, but the heart apparently did not listen to such stern lectures. In mid-November, Wade arrived at the boarding house with a cord of firewood stacked neatly in the bed of a wagon. Faye came out onto the porch, wrapping her shawl more tightly against the bitter wind. "I did not order firewood," she said. "I know," Wade replied. He began unloading the wood with steady efficiency. "But winter is coming in hard, and I figured you could use it." "I can pay for my own firewood, Mr. Armstrong." He paused in his work, holding a split log in his hands, and looked at her directly. "I know you can. You can do just about anything you set your mind to, Miss Newsome. That much is clear. But doing everything alone all the time is not strength. Sometimes accepting help is its own kind of courage." The words landed in Faye's chest with unexpected weight. She stood there on the porch, watching him work, and felt the walls she had built around herself shift just slightly. Not crumbling, not yet, but perhaps developing the first hairline cracks. "At least come inside and have coffee when you are done," she said finally. "It is too cold to send you off without something warm." Wade's face brightened with a smile that reached his eyes. "That would be nice. Thank you." 20 minutes later, they sat at the kitchen table while Faye's boarders kept discreetly to the parlor, giving them privacy. Faye poured coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove and set out some bread and butter. Wade wrapped his hands around the cup to warm them and took a sip with evident appreciation. "You make good coffee," he said. "It is just coffee," Faye replied, but she felt oddly pleased by the compliment. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Wade said, "Can I ask you something?" Faye tensed slightly but nodded. "Why are you so determined to never trust anyone? I do not mean that as criticism. I just wonder what made you so certain that people will always disappoint you." Faye's first instinct was to deflect, to throw up her usual walls and change the subject. But something about the genuine curiosity in Wade's face, the lack of judgment, made her pause. Maybe it was time someone understood why she was the way she was. "My father was a drunk," she said quietly. "A mean one when the bottle got hold of him. My mother loved him anyway, kept believing he would change, kept making excuses for why he could not hold a job or why we never had enough to eat. She loved him right up until the day he fell off his horse coming back from the saloon and broke his neck. Left us with nothing but debts." Wade listened without interrupting, his blue eyes steady on her face. "My sister fell in love with a man who promised her everything," Faye continued. "Married her, got her with child, and then left her for the gold fields when the baby was only 3 months old. Said he would send for her once he struck it rich. That was 4 years ago. She has 3 children now and no husband, living on charity from the church." "I am sorry," Wade said, and his voice carried genuine sorrow. "That is hard. I can see why you would be wary." "I am not wary," Faye corrected. "I just do not believe in love. I have seen what it does to people, how it makes them weak and foolish. Love is just a pretty word for need and desperation. I decided a long time ago that I would rather be alone than be a fool." Wade was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup between his hands. When he spoke, his words were measured and thoughtful. "I think maybe what you saw was not really love. Real love, the true kind, it does not make people weak. It makes them stronger. My parents had that kind of love. They worked side by side on a farm in Missouri for 30 years before they passed, and they made each other better every single day. They challenged each other, supported each other, but they never made each other small." "Maybe your parents were the exception," Faye said. "Maybe," Wade allowed. "Or maybe the problem is that a lot of people mistake need for love, or obligation for love, or just plain fear of being alone for love. But that does not mean the real thing does not exist." Faye wanted to argue, but something about his certainty gave her pause. Wade did not have the tone of a man trying to convince her, just someone sharing what he believed to be true. "Why do you care what I believe about love?" she asked instead. Wade met her eyes directly, and in that moment Faye saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Because I am falling in love with you, Faye. Have been since the first time I saw you standing in the doorway of the general store with the sun behind you and determination written all over your face. And I know you do not believe in love, and I know you have got no reason to trust what I am saying. But I am a patient man, and I figure the only way to prove that love is real is to show you, day after day, that my feelings are not going anywhere." The kitchen seemed very quiet suddenly. Faye could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the crackle of the fire in the stove, her own heartbeat loud in her ears. Part of her wanted to laugh at him, to tell him he was wasting his time. But a larger part, a part she had tried hard to suppress, felt something flutter to life at his words. "You do not even know me," she said finally. "Then let me know you," Wade replied. "No pressure, no expectations. Just let me spend time with you. Let me court you proper, the way a woman like you deserves to be courted. And if at the end of it you still do not believe in love, at least you will know I tried." "And what if I never change my mind?" Wade smiled, and it was a gentle, knowing expression. "Then I guess I will have spent my time getting to know a remarkable woman, and that will not be time wasted. But I have got a feeling about you, Faye Newsome. I think maybe you are not as certain as you pretend to be. I think maybe you are scared, and that is okay. Fear just means you have got something worth protecting." He finished his coffee, set the cup down carefully, and stood. "Think about it. No rush. I will be around." After he left, Faye sat at the table for a long time, her own coffee growing cold in front of her. She felt as if something fundamental had shifted, as if the ground beneath her feet was not quite as solid as it had been an hour ago. Wade Armstrong had just told her he was falling in love with her, and instead of feeling trapped or pressured, she felt something dangerously close to hope. She went to bed that night with her mind spinning, and dreamed of blue eyes and patient hands and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about love all along. The next Sunday, Wade appeared at the boarding house in a clean shirt and offered to escort Faye to church. She had not been planning to attend, having little use for religion after watching her mother pray fruitlessly for her father to change, but she found herself saying yes anyway. They walked together through the cold morning air, and Wade offered his arm to help her navigate the icy patches on the road. Faye took it, feeling the solid strength of him through the layers of fabric. At church, they sat together in one of the back pews, and Faye was acutely aware of the curious glances from the other townspeople. She knew what they were thinking, knew the gossip would be spreading before the final hymn was sung. Faye Newsome, the cold woman who ran the boarding house, sitting with Wade Armstrong from the Triple Bar Ranch. She braced herself to care about the talk, but found that Wade's steady presence beside her made it easier to ignore. After the service, they walked slowly back toward the boarding house. Wade talked about his work at the ranch, about the horses he trained and the cattle drives he had been on. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about helping his father with the farm and learning to read by lamplight after the day's work was done. He talked easily, not trying to impress her, just sharing pieces of himself as if they were gifts he trusted her to handle gently. "What about you?" he asked as they neared her gate. "How did you end up in Wyatt?" Faye considered her answer carefully. "I saved money for 6 years working as a seamstress in Denver. Lived in a tiny room and ate cheap meals and never spent a penny I did not have to. When I had enough, I looked for a place where I could buy property outright, somewhere I could build something that was mine. Found the boarding house listed in a newspaper. The previous owner had died and his son wanted to sell quickly. I took the train out, looked at it once, and bought it the same day." "That took courage," Wade said. "It took determination," Faye corrected. "Courage would have been believing someone else might help me. I just knew I could only count on myself." Wade nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I think it took courage too, to leave everything you knew and start over alone. Most people would not have the strength for that." They reached the boarding house and Faye paused at the bottom of the porch steps. "Thank you for walking with me, and for church." "It was my pleasure," Wade said. "Would you let me take you to dinner next Sunday? There is a restaurant in town that serves a decent roast chicken." Faye hesitated, feeling the old instinct to refuse to maintain her distance. But she thought about the way Wade had listened to her story without judgment, the way his presence felt solid and safe rather than suffocating. "All right," she heard herself say. "Next Sunday." The smile that spread across Wade's face was like sunrise. "I will look forward to it." Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Wade would ride into town every Sunday, and he and Faye would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes they went to church. Sometimes they took walks along the creek that ran east of town. Sometimes they simply sat in Faye's kitchen and talked while she prepared meals for the week ahead. Wade was never pushy, never demanding. He simply showed up, patient and constant as the mountains on the horizon. Slowly, incrementally, Faye found herself sharing more of her life with him. She told him about her childhood, about the fear that had been a constant companion when she never knew if her father would come home drunk or not come home at all. She told him about watching her mother fade from a vibrant young woman into someone worn down by disappointment and broken promises. She told him about her sister's letters, full of desperate cheerfulness and barely concealed despair. Wade listened to all of it, never trying to minimize her pain or tell her she should feel differently. He just listened, and sometimes he would reach across the table and cover her hand with his own, a simple gesture of solidarity that said she was not alone with these memories anymore. In return, Wade shared his own stories. He told her about losing his parents to cholera when he was 23, about the grief that had driven him to leave Missouri and drift west looking for something he could not quite name. He told her about the hard years working ranches from Texas to Montana, about learning that a man could survive just about anything if he kept putting one foot in front of the other. He told her about deciding to settle at the Triple Bar, about finding something like home in the routine of working cattle and training horses. "You ever think about having your own place?" Faye asked one afternoon in December as they walked along the frozen creek. "I think about it," Wade admitted. "I've got some money saved. Been thinking about buying land south of here, maybe starting a small operation. Nothing huge, just enough to make a decent living. Why have you not done it yet?" Wade glanced at her, and there was something significant in his expression. "I guess I was waiting to know if I would be building it just for myself, or if there might be someone who would want to build it with me." Faye's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "That is a big thing to wait on. What if that someone never comes along? Then I guess I will buy the land anyway and build a house that is too big for one person," Wade said lightly. "But I am an optimist. I tend to think things work out the way they are supposed to." They walked in silence for a while, their breath making clouds in the cold air. Faye thought about what it might mean to build something with someone else, to trust another person with her plans and dreams. The idea terrified her, but it also sent a thrill through her chest that she could not quite deny. Christmas came to Wyatt with snow and bitter cold. Faye's boarding house was full, as travelers got stranded by the weather and needed places to stay. She worked long hours cooking and cleaning, making sure everyone was comfortable. On Christmas Eve, Wade showed up at her door with a small wrapped package. "I know you are busy," he said, "but I wanted to give you this." Faye wiped her hands on her apron and took the package, feeling self-conscious. "I did not get you anything." "I did not expect you to," Wade said. "Just open it." Inside the paper was a carved wooden box small enough to fit in her palm. The lid was decorated with an intricate pattern of leaves and flowers, the work clearly done by hand with great care. When she opened it, she found the inside lined with velvet. "I made it for you," Wade said quietly. "Figured you might want a place to keep special things. Or if you do not have special things yet, maybe you will someday." Faye traced the carving with her finger, feeling the smooth wood and the love that had gone into every detail. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you. Merry Christmas, Faye." She looked up at him, this patient man who had spent months proving himself through steady devotion, and felt something crack open in her chest. "Merry Christmas, Wade." On impulse, driven by something she did not fully understand, Faye rose up on her toes and kissed his cheek. It was quick, barely more than a brush of her lips against his cold skin, but it was the first time she had initiated any kind of physical affection. When she pulled back, Wade's eyes were bright with surprise and pleasure. "That is the best Christmas present I ever got," he said softly. After he left, Faye held the wooden box and let herself cry, something she almost never allowed. She cried for all the years she had spent afraid, for all the walls she had built that were finally starting to come down. She cried because she was terrified, and she cried because for the first time in her adult life, she was beginning to hope. The new year came in with brutal cold that kept everyone inside and made travel nearly impossible. Faye did not see Wade for 3 weeks, as the snow was too deep for safe riding and the ranch had emergencies that required all hands. She found herself missing him with an intensity that alarmed her, found herself going to the window a dozen times a day to check if the weather had cleared enough for him to make the journey into town. When he finally appeared in mid-January, looking half frozen and covered in snow, Faye met him at the door and pulled him inside without a word. She made him sit by the fire and brought him hot coffee and soup, fussing over him in a way that would have embarrassed her a month ago. "I missed you," Wade said once he had thought enough to speak clearly. "Could not stand another day without seeing you, even if I had to ride through a blizzard to get here." "You could have frozen to death," Faye scolded, but her hands were gentle as she wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "Would have been worth it," Wade said, catching her hand and holding it. His fingers were still cold, but his grip was sure. "Faye, these past weeks without seeing you made me realize something. I do not just love you, I need you in my life. You make everything better, brighter. I wake up thinking about you, and I fall asleep the same way. And I know you are still scared, and I know you still do not fully believe in love, but I am asking you to take a chance on me anyway." Faye looked down at their joined hands, his large and work roughened, hers smaller but just as marked by labor. "I am scared," she admitted. "I am terrified, actually. Everything I have ever believed about love and trust is telling me to run away. But the thought of you not being in my life anymore scares me more than the thought of trusting you does. I do not know when it happened, but somehow you became important to me. Somehow you made me want to believe that maybe I was wrong about love all along." "You were not wrong," Wade said gently. "You were just protecting yourself the best way you knew how, but you do not have to protect yourself from me, Faye. I promise you that." "How can you promise that?" Faye asked, her voice breaking slightly. "How can you know you will not leave or change or decide I am too much work?" Wade stood, still wrapped in the blanket, and cupped her face in his hands. "I cannot promise that life will always be easy, or that we will never fight, or that everything will be perfect. But I can promise that I will be here, every day, working at this relationship with everything I have got. I can promise that when things get hard, I will not run. I can promise that I see you, really see you, and I love what I see. The strength, the stubbornness, the way you refuse to let the world make you small. I love all of it." Faye felt tears spilling down her cheeks, and for once she did not try to hide them. "I think I love you too," she whispered. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do." Wade's smile was brilliant, and then he was kissing her, really kissing her, and Faye kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for months. It felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time, terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade pressed his forehead to hers. "Is that a yes, then? You will take a chance on me?" "Yes," Faye said, and felt the words settle into her bones like truth. "Yes, I will take a chance on you." The rest of January and all of February passed in a blur of newfound happiness. Wade came to town whenever he could, and Faye found herself rearranging her schedule to make more time for him. They took walks in the snow, had long dinners at the restaurant, spent evenings by the fire in her kitchen talking about everything and nothing. Wade courted her properly, with flowers when he could find them and small gifts he made himself, always thoughtful, always perfectly suited to her tastes. The town noticed the change in Faye, saw the way her sharp edges had softened without losing their strength. The women who had always found her intimidating began to warm to her, and Faye discovered that having friends was not as terrible as she had imagined. She even reconnected with her sister through letters, tentatively sharing the news that she was being courted by a good man, and that maybe she had been wrong about some things. In March, with the snow finally melting and the first hints of spring appearing in the valley, Wade took Faye on a ride up into the hills above town. They stopped at a spot that overlooked the entire valley, where you could see the town of Wyatt spread out below and the mountains rising in every direction. "This is the land I was telling you about," Wade said, gesturing to the rolling acres around them. "I bought it last month. Finalized the papers with the land office." Faye looked around, seeing the potential in the grassland and the creek that ran through the property. "It is beautiful. I want to build a house here," Wade said, "and a barn for horses, maybe run some cattle, grow hay in that bottom meadow. I can see it all in my head, exactly how it should be." "It sounds wonderful," Faye said sincerely. Wade turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Faye Newsome, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You have made me happier these past months than I have been in my entire life. I know we have not been together long by some people's standards, but when you know something is right, time does not matter as much. I want to build a life with you. I want to marry you and build that house with you, and fill it with love and maybe someday children if you want them. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to prove to you every single day for the rest of our lives that love is real and it is worth believing in." He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Faye looked down at this man who had shown her such patient devotion, who had proven through months of consistent care that his words were not empty promises. She thought about all the years she had spent alone, believing that loneliness was safer than vulnerability. She thought about how he had changed her mind not through grand gestures or pretty speeches, but through the daily choice to show up and care for her without expectation of return. "Yes," she said, and her voice was strong and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Wade stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her again, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around while she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "I love you," Faye said, and saying it out loud felt like freedom. "I love you and I believe in love now. You changed my mind. You changed everything." "You changed me too," Wade said. "Made me believe that patient devotion could win out over fear. Made me believe that the best things are worth waiting for." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Wyatt, with half the town in attendance. Faye wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Wade wore his best suit with a string tie. Faye's sister came all the way from Denver with her 3 children, and seeing her, there made Faye cry happy tears during the ceremony. The ranch owner from the Triple Bar served as Wade's best man, and one of Faye's boarders stood up with her. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Faye like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Faye kissed him back with all the love she had once been so sure did not exist. The reception was held at the boarding house, which Faye had sold to a young couple looking to settle in Wyatt. It had been a hard decision to let go of her independence, but Wade had made it clear that the choice was hers, and that he would support whatever she decided. In the end, Faye had realized that true independence was not about refusing all help and doing everything alone. True independence was having the freedom to choose her own path, and if that path led to building a life with Wade, that was her choice to make. They spent their wedding night in the hotel in town, and then the next morning they rode out to their land to begin building their future. Wade had already started work on the house with help from some of the ranch hands, and the frame was up, strong and solid against the sky. Over the following months, they worked side by side to finish it, Faye proving herself as capable with hammer and nails as Wade was with lumber and planning. The house grew around them, room by room, wall by wall. It was not large, but it was sturdy and well made, with windows that let in the morning sun and a porch that looked out over the valley. They built a barn next, and Wade brought home 3 horses he had been training at the ranch, along with a dozen head of cattle to start their herd. Faye planted a garden near the house, vegetables and flowers mixed together in cheerful abundance. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right, work and rest in equal measure. Wade rode out each morning to check the cattle and tend the horses, while Faye managed the house and garden. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about their day or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that comes from being perfectly content in someone's presence. The first year of marriage was not without its challenges. They had their first real fight in August when Wade made a major purchase for the ranch without consulting Faye first, and she reminded him sharply that she was his partner, not his dependent. Wade apologized immediately, and they talked through how to make decisions together, how to respect each other's input while still allowing room for individual judgment. They came out of it stronger, with clearer communication and deeper trust. There were hard moments when Faye's old fears would surface, when something would trigger her instinct to pull away and protect herself. But Wade never let her retreat fully, never let her hide behind walls again. He was patient but persistent, gently calling her back to connection when she tried to isolate. And slowly, Faye learned that conflict did not mean the end of love, that working through difficulties actually strengthened their bond rather than weakening it. In the spring of their second year together, Faye discovered she was pregnant. She told Wade over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. He went very still for a moment, and then his face broke into a smile so wide it seemed to light up the entire kitchen. "Really?" he asked. "We are going to have a baby, really," Faye confirmed and found herself smiling too despite the nervousness she felt. Wade came around the table and knelt beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I cannot wait to meet you." The pregnancy was not easy. Faye was sick for the first 3 months, and the later months brought aches and pains that made working difficult. But Wade was attentive and caring, taking on extra chores without complaint and making sure Faye rested as much as possible. He read to her in the evenings, his voice soothing as he worked his way through books borrowed from the small library in town. Their son was born in December of 1880, arriving in the early morning hours with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him William, after Wade's father, and from the moment Faye held him in her arms, she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. She had thought she understood love after falling for Wade, but this was something entirely different, something primal and overwhelming. Wade was a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby. He would walk the floor with William when the baby fussed at night, singing old songs his mother had taught him. He carved toys for his son as he had carved the jewelry box for Faye, pouring love into every detail. Watching Wade with their son, Faye sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Wyatt, so certain that love was a lie and that trusting anyone was foolishness. She barely recognized that bitter, lonely woman now. Wade had proven to her that love was real through patient devotion, through showing up day after day, through choosing her again and again. And in doing so, he had not made her weak as she had feared. Instead, he had made her stronger, more capable, more fully herself than she had ever been alone. As William grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew too. Wade's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to expand the herd and buy more horses. Faye sold eggs and vegetables in town, and her reputation as a fair dealer and hard worker brought steady customers. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When William was 3, Faye became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter arrived in the summer of 1884 with her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Mary, after Faye's mother, and Faye felt like she was healing something in herself by giving her daughter the name of a woman who had loved unwisely but deeply. Life was full and busy with 2 young children and a ranch to run. There were days when Faye was so tired she could barely stand, days when the work seemed endless and the challenges overwhelming. But there were also mornings when she woke up to find Wade watching her with love in his eyes, afternoons when the children's laughter filled the house with joy, evenings when the 4 of them sat together on the porch and watched the stars come out over their land. The years passed, marked by the cycles of planting and harvest, cattle drives and horse sales, children's birthdays and quiet anniversaries. William grew into a serious boy who loved horses as much as his father did, spending hours in the barn learning to care for them. Mary was wild and fearless, climbing trees and chasing chickens with equal enthusiasm. Faye and Wade raised them with love and clear boundaries, teaching them to work hard and treat others with respect. In 1889, when William was 9 and Mary was 5, Faye found herself pregnant for a 3rd time. The pregnancy came as a surprise, as she was now 35 and had not expected more children. But she and Wade welcomed the news with joy, making room in their lives and their hearts for another little one. Their 2nd son was born in March of 1890, and they named him Thomas. He was a placid baby, content to watch the world with wide, dark eyes, so different from his energetic siblings. Wade doted on all 3 children equally, making time for each of them despite the demands of the ranch. One evening in late summer of 1891, after the children were in bed, Faye and Wade sat together on the porch as they had done hundreds of times before. Faye was mending a shirt, and Wade was working on a piece of leather tack that needed repair. The air was warm and pleasant, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "You remember when you first asked to court me?" Faye asked suddenly. "When you told me you would prove love was real through patient devotion," Wade smiled, setting aside his work. "I remember. You looked at me like I had lost my mind." "I thought you were wasting your time," Faye admitted. "I was so certain I was right about love being a lie. I did not want to believe you because believing you felt dangerous. What changed your mind?" Wade asked, though he had asked this question before in various ways over the years. "Everything," Faye said simply. "Every time you showed up when you said you would. Every time you helped without expecting anything in return. Every time you listened to my fears without trying to talk me out of them. Every single day you chose to love me even when I did not know how to love you back. You wore down my defenses not through force but through persistence and gentleness. You changed my mind by proving yourself trustworthy over and over again." Wade reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Best thing I ever did was refuse to give up on you." "Best thing I ever did was let you in," Faye replied. She set aside her mending and moved to sit on Wade's lap, something she only did when the children were not around to giggle at their parents' affection. Wade wrapped his arms around her, and Faye leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling completely safe and loved. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For teaching me that love is real, for showing me that trusting someone does not make you weak, for giving me this life, this family, this happiness. I never thought I could have any of it, and you gave it all to me." "We gave it to each other," Wade corrected gently. "You took a chance on me, Faye. That took courage, and I never forget that. I know what it cost you to trust me, and I try never to take that trust for granted." They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding each other close. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and loved. Around them, the ranch they had built together stretched out under the stars, solid and enduring. And in Faye's heart, where once there had been only cynicism and fear, there was now love in abundance, love that had changed everything. The years continued to roll by, bringing all the usual joys and sorrows of life. William grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Mary, true to her wild nature, married a cowboy from Montana and moved north, though she visited often with her own growing family. Thomas proved to have a gift with numbers and went to work at the bank in Wyatt, making his parents proud with his success. Wade and Faye grew older together, their hair turning gray and their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something rich and layered, built on decades of shared experiences and weathered storms. They were the couple younger people in Wyatt pointed to as an example of what marriage should be, proof that love could last if it was tended carefully. On their 25th anniversary in 1906, their children threw them a party at the ranch house. The place was filled with friends and family, with grandchildren running underfoot and long tables groaning with food. As the sun began to set, Wade pulled Faye onto the porch for a moment alone. 25 years, he said wonderingly. Hard to believe it has been that long. Longer than that if you count the courtship, Faye pointed out with a smile. You started pursuing me in the summer of 1878. That is almost 28 years of putting up with me. Not putting up with, Wade corrected. Loving, choosing, cherishing, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Faye kissed him then, a kiss that held 25 years of marriage and all the love that had grown between them. When they pulled apart, both of them had tears in their eyes. You changed my life, Faye said. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for not giving up on me when I was determined to push you away. You changed mine too, Wade replied. Made me a better man. Made me understand what it means to truly love someone, not just the easy parts but the hard parts too. Made me a father and a husband, and gave me a life richer than anything I could have imagined. They stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, the same view they had enjoyed for nearly 3 decades. The land was still theirs, though William would inherit it someday. The house still stood solid, weathered by time but carefully maintained, and their love still endured, tested by years but never broken. Inside, someone called for them to come cut the anniversary cake, and they went back to join their family, hand in hand as they had been for 25 years. The party lasted late into the night, filled with laughter and stories and the warmth that comes from being surrounded by people you love. Later, much later, when all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Faye and Wade lay in bed together. Wade's arm was around Faye's shoulders and her head rested on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, Faye said into the darkness. I never get tired of saying it, even after all these years. I never get tired of hearing it, Wade replied. I love you too, Faye Armstrong. Today, tomorrow, always. Faye smiled and closed her eyes, drifting off to sleep secure in the knowledge that she was loved, that she had been wrong about love all those years ago, and that the best decision she had ever made was trusting a patient cowboy who refused to give up on a cynical woman's heart. The years that followed were gentler, as they eased into the rhythm of grandparenthood and watched their children build their own lives. Wade's joints ached more in the cold, and Faye's eyesight began to fail, but they faced these challenges together with the same determination they had brought to every other obstacle in their lives. In the spring of 1912, Wade fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts and Faye's devoted nursing, he did not recover. He died peacefully one morning with Faye holding his hand, his last words a whispered declaration of love. He was 61 years old, and they had been married for 31 years. Faye's grief was profound but not debilitating. She had loved deeply and been loved in return, had experienced 3 decades of happiness that she once would have sworn was impossible. She missed Wade with every breath, but she did not regret a single moment of their time together. The risk of pain at the end was worth it for all the joy that had come before. She lived another 8 years, staying on the ranch with William and his family, helping raise her grandchildren and sharing stories of their grandfather with anyone who would listen. She told them about the patient cowboy who had courted a cynical woman, who had proven through daily devotion that love was real. She told them that being brave enough to trust someone, to let them into your heart despite your fears, was one of the most worthwhile things a person could do. Faye Newsome Armstrong died in her sleep in the summer of 1920 at the age of 66, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Wade had created together. She was buried next to Wade on a hill overlooking their ranch, the land they had built together, the home they had filled with love. On her headstone, placed there by her children, were simple words that summed up the transformation of her life. She learned to believe in love, and it changed everything. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from William to his children and then to theirs, each generation adding their own stories to the foundation that Faye and Wade had laid. And always, the story was told of the woman who did not believe in love and the cowboy who changed her mind with patient devotion, proving that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for, and that love, real love, can transform even the most cynical heart into something capable of extraordinary joy. Their love story became a kind of legend in Wyatt, Colorado, told and retold as an example of what persistence and genuine care could accomplish. Young people courting would ride out to see the ranch and the graves on the hill, taking inspiration from the couple who had built something lasting in a hard land. The wooden jewelry box Wade had carved for Faye was passed down through the family, each generation adding their own small treasures to it, filling it with memories and love just as Wade had hoped. And through it all, the land endured, the mountains stood eternal, and the legacy of a cynical woman and a patient cowboy lived on, a testament to the transformative power of love freely given and carefully tended. They had built a life together from nothing but determination and devotion, and in doing so, they had proved that love, real and true and lasting love, was not just real but was worth every risk, every moment of vulnerability, every leap of faith required to embrace it fully. In the end, Faye's journey from cynicism to belief, from isolation to connection, from fear to love, was the greatest adventure of her life. Wade had given her that adventure simply by refusing to give up, by showing up day after day with patience and care, by proving through actions rather than words that he meant what he said. And Faye, in turn, had given Wade the gift of her trust, hard-won and precious, and together they had built something beautiful that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, rippling out through their descendants and into the future they had worked so hard to secure.